I'm your host, Michael Callahan. This is Where We Go Next. And dinosaurs and social media don't seem like an obvious combination. One conjures images of ancient beasts roaming prehistoric landscapes. The other of viral dance challenges. But our guest today has managed to bridge the two, amassing over 1 million followers on TikTok by sharing his paleontological discoveries in real time. This isn't just about making fossils go viral. It's about democratizing science, inspiring the next generation of researchers, and using modern tools to unlock the secrets of our planet's past. Harrison Duran is a field paleontologist who has gained notoriety through his popular social media accounts, which document his preparation and excavation in the American West. Species which he has excavated and prepared include Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus rex. Harrison, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What inspired you to become a paleontologist? Or to put it another way, you've been passionate about dinosaurs since you were a kid. What was the inciting incident all the way back in the early 2000s that first got you excited about dinosaurs?
Ever since I could remember, I grew up in Orange County, California. Without any traffic, that's about 45 minutes to an hour to the La Brea tar pits. And I remember seeing such, to us, exotic megafauna, saber-toothed cats, mastodons, ancient bison, mammoths, Columbian mammoths, ground sloths. All the magnificent megafauna of the Pleistocene were all just right in the backyard, right in California, and then ultimately throughout North and South America. And that was just a really, cool way to be introduced to paleontology, to have active dig sites, at the tar pits, and to be a kid always wanting to go there, and the LA County Museum of Natural History. Growing up, I would say that being close to La Brea was quite the incentive and the inspiration.
So being close to the La Brea tar pits, and I live in Los Angeles myself, although I grew up in Northern California. And I relate to what you're saying in a way, because it almost feels like you get to experience another world, even though it was our world. I mean, millions and millions of years ago, but it almost feels like you're looking at alien life.
Yes. I've always said that with paleontology, it's almost like going to different planets. If you're thinking of the concepts of traveling to alien worlds and seeing alien fauna and everything, in a way, that is what paleontology is. You're going to places that are so far back in time and so different than our world today that it might as well be another planet or another dimension.
Well, speaking of other planets and other dimensions, I want to dig a little deeper here about what first excited you and what got you passionate about dinosaurs specifically. So I'll share a little bit of a story from when I was a kid. So when I was 12 years old, I was homesick from middle school. And I had heard about this movie called Star Wars. I had never seen it. But since I was homesick and my mom was going to Blockbuster, she said, "Hey, Michael, are there any movies you want me to pick up?" And I said, "Yeah, I've heard about this movie called Star Wars. Can you, go rent the VHS?" She rented the VHS for the first Star Wars, A New Hope. And I was instantly hooked. And immediately after that, watched Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I became so obsessed with Star Wars, the original trilogy, that in the 90s, aging myself here, I taught myself HTML, I made my own website, and I started writing Star Wars fan fiction. I went deep, right? But, while I had friends who were also excited about Star Wars, there were friends of mine who had their own interests, their own hobbies, their own passions. And no matter how much I might try and share my excitement about Star Wars with them, they were passionate about their own things for entirely different reasons. Besides being only an hour away from something like the La Brea tar pits, what was it specifically about dinosaurs or about fossils or about the world that as it existed 65 to 120 million years ago that specifically hooked you? Do you have like a specific memory of that first moment?
I wouldn't say that it would be a particular moment. It was just a culmination of exposure. And thanks to my parents, for raising me that way, and exposure to just a myriad of different media and literature that really got me hooked on the idea of lost worlds of the past. One of the initial movies that I had seen as a kid, there were two. Everybody would think that it would be Jurassic Park. I of course saw Jurassic Park, but The Lost World, I'm talking like the one from the 1920s, the stop motion animation, and then 1 million years BC with Raquel Welch. And it was like caveman and stop motion animation and stuff. Those movies, they introduced the concept of truly a lost world, of a time, of a dimension that you could escape to. And unlike, I would say, Harry Potter or any other science fiction, in some cases could turn out to be real at some point. Unlike Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, the thing that got me was that it was real. It was something that was tangible, that could be discovered, a place that you could existentially travel to. And as a kid, that is really the concept. It wasn't quite the initial moment, but the onslaught of like old Phil Tippett National Geographic, documentaries with dinosaurs and Walking with Dinosaurs, like the initial original one from 1997. That documentary was an absolutely huge, profound influence on me. And I also went to the premiere in LA of Disney's Dinosaur, which is a little bit, campier in a kid's movie. It's not quite as scientific as Walking with Dinosaurs, but I remember that was a huge influence too, because they had a big thing set up with animatronics and everything. So Disney's Dinosaur was a big part of it. And this is kind of a side to that, not to relate this into 9/11, but when 9/11 happened, I was brought out of preschool early on. And my mom got me a VHS of Disney's Dinosaur. And I was so excited. I thought it was like a holiday. We're all getting out early and I'm getting a gift. And that's kind of messed up. But, around that time, which was obviously a very tumultuous time for my parents, I think for kids, for being in preschool, you couldn't quite understand the concept. I knew something bad was going on. But I would say throughout that time, that movie was a good source of joy for my childhood in a time that within the country and existentially was not great. And so that was also another influence. But to sum it up, with the old stop motion animation movies and then the Disney movie and the BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs and the old National Geographic documentaries, the culmination of that was really what fostered the passion.
I think if you're a preschooler, you get a pass for not, absorbing the entire weight of 9/11. So I think you're safe there. Before we get into your first experience as an adult excavating your very first fossil, let's go with the basics here. So what is a fossil? Because I hear people talk about dinosaur skeletons, but my understanding is that skeletons are made of bones. Even in your videos on TikTok, which are supremely popular with millions of views, you mention bones as well when talking about your work. So do fossils still contain bone? Are they all rock? What makes a fossil a fossil?
A fossil, at least by the definition, is a remnant of life, whether it be a bone, mummification, a footprint, called an ichneufossil or a trace fossil. Anything that life leaves behind that's over 10,000 years old. And so that can be in the case of Pleistocene or Ice Age fossils that are tens of thousands of years old. They are still the actual bone of the animal, yet they're still considered a fossil. If you have footprints that are millions of years old from either ancient mammals during the Eocene or dinosaurs or even the Permian therapsids, before the dinosaurs, those are also fossils as well. So any footprint, any imprint, tail dragging, anything like that, a nest, that is all considered a fossil. And then, of course, you have the actual bones of the animals. When you have something that's millions of years old, the bone has actually been replaced by mineral. When the organic material of the animal, so the bone, decays, water fills into that space and replaces the organic material with mineralized material. So it could be rock, it could be the sediment that's surrounding the fossil, and it will actually replace it at the cellular level. That's how we get dinosaur fossils. So dinosaur fossils or anything really that's, older than a couple million years, it's going to be the mineralized replacement of the actual bone.
So the definition of what a fossil is incredibly broad. When someone says they found a fossil, they could be referring to, as you said, everything from a footprint to actual biological material to, I guess I wasn't aware that the definition was as broad as it is. Why is it so broad? Why isn't it a more narrow definition so people can understand immediately what a person means?
It's broad because life itself leaves so many different traces. Whether it's animals moving on the surface, they leave footprints or they leave their feces. We have coprolites too. That's a trace fossil. And sometimes coprolites, which are, for everyone listening, they are mineralized poop. And even those have bits of bone in them. So we actually have Tyrannosaurus rex coprolites, which is like a solid rock in the shape of what you would think T-Rex poop would look like. And there's actually bone inside that. We have footprints that are left by an animal as it was alive. that is considered a fossil. Any part of life that life leaves behind is considered a fossil. So that's why it has to be so broad, because life has bones. Life has movement, throughout their life when they were moving around and walking around. There's movement there. There's nests. There's eggs. There are mummies in some cases. You have mineralized dinosaur skin that has, left an imprint and then filled in. So we have dinosaur mummies. And to clarify, that's not actually organic mummies like an Egyptian mummy. It's actually just a mineralized imprint or infill of flesh of dinosaur skin. The definition, to answer your question why it's so broad, it's because life leaves so many different traces. A fossil is merely the trace of life.
You could say that life finds a way.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to. I saw an opportunity.
When it comes about, you have to take it.
Exactly. You have to seize it. Since I referenced Jurassic Park, I have to ask this question right up front because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering. The woolly mammoth died off about 4,000 years ago, and we'll talk a little bit about the woolly mammoth a little later when we get into your connection with colossal biosciences. But 4,000 years ago isn't that long ago. I know that people have found woolly mammoth remains that actually contain like wet tissue and actual DNA of the woolly mammoth. That's how colossal biosciences is going to be able to one day bring back the woolly mammoth from extinction, quote unquote. But when it comes to something that is 65 million plus years old, have we ever found dinosaur remains that contain any DNA, or have we ever found anything resembling organic material when it comes to a dinosaur?
That's a good question. I have to answer it carefully. The short answer is no, in the sense of no DNA and no proteins. But there has been collagen. Not true collagen, but a fossilized version of keratin. But I guess to answer the question, I'll have to backtrack a little bit. For things in the Pleistocene, we have DNA because it does exist. But the longest DNA could last is maybe a couple million years in perfect conditions, perfect temperature, pressurization, air. That's the only way that DNA could really last. The better the conditions, the longer it lasts. The longest that DNA has been able to last that we could sequence has been around 2 million years ago or so. And I know that I believe Beth Shapiro was a part of some of the publications on that. And she's, of course, the lead scientific advisor for colossal biosciences. She works with paleogenomics. So we do not have dinosaur DNA. It does not exist. It is all mineral, all the organic material, any squishy, organic, rottable stuff has just deteriorated completely. And so we do not have any DNA or proteins from dinosaurs. But we do have the fossilized version of collagen that we have found in dinosaur bones. So organic material found in the form of crude oil, coal, and natural gas. Coal and crude oil are carbonaceous macromolecules. So they are carbon, but they're the product of what carbon, organic molecules break down to, and they can't break down to any further. So they break down to a form that lasts for millions of years. As it turns out, collagen also exists in that form. So we have found the coal or oil version of collagen inside of dinosaur bones, which sounds promising for DNA, but it's not. There is no organic material of which we could bring back dinosaurs or sequence their DNA or their protein sequences.
So you're saying that it would be impossible for a benevolent, if misguided, elderly billionaire to be able to build on an isolated island near Costa Rica a park that contained dinosaurs?
Unfortunately, yes, it is impossible. As much as we would like to see it, as much as we would like the screaming and the running, it's not going to happen. But it can happen with some terrifying beasts that existed in a not so far away time.
As I mentioned earlier, you have a popular TikTok account to the tune of 1.3 million followers, and some of your videos have millions of views. One in particular from 2021, in which you uncover a tooth that belonged to a juvenile tyrannosaur, has nearly 17 million views. And what's so interesting to me, Harrison, is how, and I mean this as a compliment, your videos completely disregard everything that a person is quote unquote supposed to do when making viral videos for social media. You usually narrate throughout the video, or a portion of it, explaining what you're doing and providing context and educating the viewer on what they're seeing. But beyond that, it is just video of you doing the work of paleontology, on site, in the dirt, excavating fossils. There's no sexy ring light. You're not sitting in a studio talking to camera. I rarely ever even see your face. So What do you think it is about your videos documenting the fascinating but routine work of paleontology that connects with viewers?
Paleontology in the field and in the lab has always been filmed by major documentaries and production companies, where they film a team of paleontologists and sometimes the lead researchers on camera and talking, but it always has the feeling of a they, them, like those scientists or that institution. It has kind of a facelessness to it.
A distance.
A distance, a less personable thing. I think the thing that resonates with people is that I say that, hey, I am doing this. Here we are today digging this up. Here's this thing in my hands. Here's something that I'm securing with adhesive and carefully picking out of the ground. I bypass the production company that's filming it and then the institution and its faculty that work for it and make it just a more direct connection to the viewer. And I think it's one that really hasn't existed before because traditionally we haven't had the platforms to do that. I mean, we've had YouTube since 2006 and stuff. But short form content that gets directly to the point to get the viewer's attention and to pack in a bunch of information in a 60-second to a minute and a half format, that hadn't really existed up until a couple of years ago. And I downloaded TikTok for the first time in like 2020. And I thought it was just kind of a silly app for dancing and ring lights and different stuff like that. But I saw a carpenter make a chair and it was a really great video. And I was like, holy cow, I could do that with this. I'd always made videos growing up. I had always done little miniature productions, throughout high school. And I had always had that side of filmmaking. It wasn't enough to go to film school, but I always knew that it would come back to me at some point. I always knew that, I would have it come into my work and in some sort of science, whether that was paleontology or biotech. And I was fortunate enough to have that avenue, to have that ability and that platform and the availability of phones to take 4K footage and everything. That was a recent adaptation. It was kind of a perfect storm of technology and opportunity that allowed me to make the content, that personalized content that really connects with the viewers.
Have you ever heard of or seen that YouTube channel, Primitive Technology?
Yes.
Instantly made me think of that. For our listeners who may not be familiar, it's this guy named John Plant who's out in the bush of Australia. It might be his full-time thing now. I know initially it was just something he did on the weekends when he was away from his 9 to 5. He would just go out into the wilderness and record himself with no narration, just reconstruct tools or habitats from ancient human history, using only the tools that would have been available to them at that time. And it often is filmed over the course of several weekends or several weeks, and it's just him building it. And it was hypnotic. There is something that really makes it feel like you're much more connected to the process when you kind of remove all that distance between the person who's doing the thing and the audience who's watching that person do the thing. Let's jump forward in time from the early 2000s all the way to June 1st, 2019, when you were still a college student at UC Merced. You went out on your very first dig for fossils in what's called the Badlands of North Dakota at a fossil site called the Hell Creek Formation. You were there for 2 weeks with a local professor and longtime excavator, Michael Chelland. The two of you had previously met at a 2017 conference and bonded over a shared love of dinosaurs. So what did you find on the fourth day of your first ever fossil dig?
We found Alice the Triceratops skull, and it would be a Triceratops horridus that existed probably 67 million years ago, if you want to count where horridus is in the fossil record. And the skull contains both eyes, the snout, the nose horn, the beak, and one brow horn. It was a thrilling discovery. It was my first discovery. It was 4 days into going fossil hunting in the Hell Creek Formation. A really indescribable feeling. Like, to me, up until that point, I hadn't worked with dinosaur fossils yet. So to find Triceratops was like finding an icon. It was like finding a movie star. To do that was a really life-changing experience, evidently. And I've been in the field excavating ever since.
Just to contextualize this, how rare is it to find a Triceratops skull or any kind of dinosaur skull that is as complete as the one that you found?
There are Triceratops skulls found every year, at least by one group or team. In fact, I'm excavating one right now, currently in South Dakota. But to find one like Alice, I would say relatively in the field of paleontology, they are not as uncommon. They're not common like a clam or, an ammonite or anything. But as far as dinosaurs in the Hell Creek, Triceratops is the most common dinosaur found. And we typically find the skulls as opposed to a skeleton. But with Alice, at first it was a great discovery. We thought, it's just another Triceratops skull. But Alice actually has a very unique deformity or a pathology, perhaps. It does not have a right brow horn. So it has a left brow horn, but it looks like it was born without a right brow horn. Typically, we see Triceratops with broken off horns. Then there's regrowth of bone on the area, the stub that was broken off, probably fighting or defending itself against a T-Rex. And with Alice, it looks like it was born without it. That's the true distinction with Alice the Triceratops, because as I prepped it, as I began the fossil preparation process, which for the listeners is when we say fossil preparation, we're essentially restoring the specimen. So we're cleaning it with air-powered tools, using air-powered chisels or blasters, and we are essentially restoring it to its best condition. We sculpt in areas that are missing and make sure that the specimen is structurally secured and laminated with adhesives to ensure its future and for display and research. But, as I was preparing Alice, I found out that, yes, the right brow horn was not only missing, we knew that, but it looked like it was born without right brow horn. So quite a distinction and not common. That's actually probably never really been found the way it is in a Triceratops skull.
Wow. And you're able to tell tens and tens of millions of years later the difference between a Triceratops who was born without something versus whether it was lost in battle or injury. You're able to make that distinction just based on the fossil.
Yes, because, fossils break, they warp under stresses and pressures of geologic time. But the cool thing about mineralized bone, since it's replaced to the cellular level, we could tell when there's regrowth on a bone. So we could tell when it was an injury or when it was just a break, when it was already fossilized and it broke apart, we could tell these sorts of things. We could even tell if it's broken apart and fossilized for 2 million years after the animal died, washed up again in a river, and then reburied in a swamp. We could tell that. We could tell what you would call pathology or an injury or an illness. We've identified arthritis in dinosaurs. We've identified bone cancer too. There's lots of different ways and techniques that we could do to come up with these conclusions and to prove them. And so with Alice, sometimes, as I said before, Triceratops do have broken horns. There are some that are broken off, and then you could see the regrowth of bone, kind of that cauliflower-like structure for when bones try to regrow. We could tell that was an injury that happened, obviously, before the animal died. And then if there's no regrowth, if there's a clean break, we could tell, that's just the fossil that broke apart. But injuries, illnesses, deformities, these are things that we can actually see through the life history of the animal just from the condition of the bone and all the things that it tells us.
Triceratops, I've heard them called the cows of the Cretaceous. Why are they referred to as that? Have you heard that phrase before?
Yes, I would even call them a Cape buffalo from a dimension of, of extreme terror. What's funny? It's like the Triceratops in media for some reason are portrayed as just a docile herbivore. But in nature, herbivores are the meanest. Herbivores are more dangerous than carnivores, right? Because carnivores are cautious. They can't just go and attack everything because if they get injured, they can't hunt, they die. Even lions and bears, are pretty cautious when it comes to prey. So herbivores are built with weaponry. Typically, they either have horns or a larger body mass than carnivores. Horns, tusks, and everything. So there clearly is an evolutionary pressure to make herbivores more physically imposing than carnivores. And so with Triceratops, to say it was the cow of the Cretaceous, which I've heard, it's called that because it's an herbivore and there's a lot of them. You would kind of have this picture of a bunch of cows on a landscape. But, in actuality, they would have been probably one of the most terrifying animals to encounter. I mean, you think that a Cape buffalo and a rhino is tough. A Triceratops weighs 20,000 pounds, has a shield around its neck, has spears coming out of its face. It can shift its center of gravity and squat to be this almost immovable object. And they could sprint too. So they were built to not only compete with each other for mates and territory, but to also fend themselves off from Tyrannosaurus Rex. I would put them as the roided out rhino, Cape buffalo, muskox from hell, as Gandalf would put it, a demon of the ancient world. I wouldn't necessarily put it in the docile category. No, I would put it in the most terrifying herbivore to ever walk the earth category.
Yeah, I've heard of cow tipping. I don't think you could tip this cow over.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. I would probably flip your car if you multiple times if you did that.
It is kind of a minor miracle that you were able to find something so significant on your very first ever dig. What did it feel like to literally touch history, to hold something 65 million years old in your hands?
Overwhelmed with emotion, in tears. It was like an existential moment. I understand the depth of it, the meaning of it. For me, it was an experience that really does bring you to tears. And I've had friends and family come out to the dig sites. And the thing that I tell them is that, you're not the first person to see this. We're digging up right now. You're the first to see it in tens of millions of years. It really overwhelms you when you think about it, because the scale of time is literally inconceivable to us, right? We could see how Caesar crosses the Rubicon 2,000 years ago, and to us, that's an eternity, but that is an absolute blink in the eye in the scale of time. And it's such a far time, as I said before, it's so far back that it might as well be a different dimension. So it's really like you're traveling to an alien world. And that's kind of the way that I see it now. I see it as not only just traversing time, but I put myself there. I tell myself that I am traveling there and I am there in that world, when you're touching it.
After you dug Alice up as the sun was setting on the dig site, I saw that while you were alone with her, or it, while you were alone with Alice, I saw somewhere that you would talk to her. What would you say?
Yeah. Oh, just words of affirmation. She's a great listener. She'll just sit there all day and soak up anything that you send her way. But, I would just say, like, so beautiful. Finally met you. I know this sounds kind of cringe for people listening, but
I get it.
When you're there, you really have to be there, and you really have to say, oh, old girl, we finally found you, just stuff like that. But it's amazing to be able to say that to a triceratops. We talk to dogs, we talk to even farm animals that way, to horses, to be able to kind of say it to an actual triceratops. It'll make you do and act certain ways when you're presented at such a situation.
Oh, I totally understand that. I mean, it was basically 2 decades in the making, a physical culmination, a physical representation of a dream realized.
Yes, all the movies, all the toys, the experiences, the shows, the pondering, the passion, everything had really culminated to that moment.
The Hell Creek Formation spans 4 states: North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. What is the history of the Hell Creek Formation, and why are there so many fossils there specifically?
It would stretch from about 68 million years to 65.5/66. Depends on, the type of layer that you're dating, but that's essentially where the KPG, or the asteroid extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs, was about 66 million years ago. And so the history of it is this 2 million years of time where you have T-Rex, Triceratops, and Montosaurus, which is a duck-billed dinosaur that, was as big, or even in many cases bigger than T-Rex. Ankylosaurus, the one that's armored with a club on the end of its tail. Denversaurus, which is a kind of a cousin of Ankylosaurus. Various raptors, Pachycephalosaurus. The Hell Creek Formation has a lot of the iconic dinosaurs that we think of today. And like when you think of dinosaurs, you think of those. So the reason why there's a bunch of fossils in that area is that there are badlands to expose them. So some people ask, why did they all live up there? I'm like, well, they didn't live up there. They lived everywhere throughout the continent, just like a deer lives everywhere in North America today. It's just that the exposed rock from that time period is in that general region. And there is Cretaceous rock in Texas and Colorado, Utah. There's Cretaceous rock in different areas, but there's just a density of fossils in the Hell Creek Formation. And to kind of answer your question more directly, is that it's because the Hell Creek was broken up into 6 different geologic members. And these are topographical or geologic markers that, where it's mudstone, sandstone, mudstone. And so they're kind of stacked on top of each other. And mudstone indicates a floodplain, a low amount of water energy passing through an area, a floodplain or a swamp. And that's pretty good for fossil preservation, right? Because an animal will die, it gets buried in the mud and the muck. There's not a whole lot of scavengers that could get to it, so the skeleton pretty much remains articulated. Other times there's rivers. You'll have a fluvial environment, as we say in geology, where you have rivers that are passing through. So there's a lot more sand. Things live and die by rivers. We see that even today on the Serengeti. You see wildebeest and zebra crossing a river and they're being eaten by alligators and lions. A lot of things exist near water. So a river environment is going to have a lot of fossils. a lot of things dying, and then the water pushes and piles up a bunch of bones on the side of a point bar where the river's turning. And or sometimes even some of the best articulated specimens have actually been in sand or sandstone. An animal would die near a river, it would get buried pretty quickly by a flooding event. So that's kind of why we have a lot of fossils, is because there were rivers which preserved bodies and bones in the side of sandbanks. And then there were swamps where you have things get caught in the mud or just die in the mud or get hunted. And so you have a good deposit of that. And my dig sites, that I have in South Dakota, most of it is mudstone, but some of it is also in sand. So I have a perfectly articulated complete turtle shell that I found this field season that, is in sand. And then I have another perfectly articulated turtle shell that is in mudstone. So it really depends. It's either the floody mud plain or the river that preserves these things. And that's why there's a lot of fossils in that area.
Yeah, I saw one of your TikTok videos that involved a turtle shell. It must have been one of those two.
Yes, those are the most recent, discoveries this field season. And then I guess one I'll announce right now, I have the footage of it, but I'm still making a couple of videos, editing that. But I found a Triceratops skull. Looks like a just below a subadult individual. So not quite a juvenile, but not quite a full-size adult. So it's a Triceratops skull genie that has both horns, eye socket, the brain case, the forehead, and then other miscellaneous pieces of the frill and other parts too. And I still have to dig around the site and make sure I cover all my areas of the dig site so I'm not missing anything. But it's an exciting discovery, and I can't wait to show everybody.
It's interesting what you said about how, of course, dinosaurs lived everywhere. It's just that we're only able to find them in areas that were ripe for their preservation. Like if for some reason we only thought humans in the past lived in Pompeii, well, it's not that they only lived in Pompeii. It's that the conditions, unfortunately, were just right to preserve humans living in Pompeii for thousands of years.
Right, exactly. Or a bog, in the UK. You have all those mummified people and bogs. And yeah, they didn't just live in bogs. They lived all over the place.
I read that the Hell Creek Formation acts as a record of the moment that the dinosaurs went extinct. Can you speak more to that?
Yes. So it is the last 2 million years of the dinosaurs. And it also preserves the asteroid impact layer, which has a layer of iridium ash. And how do we know this? How do we know it's an asteroid? Well, iridium is very rare on Earth, but it's plentiful in asteroids. And there's this layer of ash that's about like an inch or two thick. There's dinosaurs below that layer. Then there's the asteroid impact catastrophe apocalypse. And then there's no dinosaurs above that. So we pretty much have a good indication of what happened. The Hell Creek Formation preserves that last time period. And so we really get to see the dinosaurs at their very end. To speak further about the asteroid impact, the Hell Creek Formation also has one of the, if not the greatest paleontological site in the world, which is this dig site known as Tanis. It's led by Robert De Palma, and it's an international research team that studies the site.
I read about this, yeah.
Yeah, you have seismologists, you have everything, but it is the Pompeii of the dinosaurs. It captures the hour and then 2 hours after the asteroid impact. You're like, how can we do that? How does that happen?
Yeah. How? Yeah. That's the first question that pops into my mind.
So it's multiple lines of evidence. First, the hypothesis that the site was the Pompeii of the asteroid impact was met with heavy skepticism. But as the years followed and the evidence mounted up, it was proven that the site, is from the asteroid impact. So what the site is, it's the beach of a river. On this are fish preserved in this mud flow layer. This mud flow was caused by the tremors from the asteroid. As the asteroid hit, there were earthquakes that the Earth's crust couldn't even produce. It was absolutely insane earthquakes. And as you know, living in California, right, an earthquake, you see what that does to a swimming pool. Like if you just shake it a little bit, the swimming pool goes crazy. If you just have even the smallest earthquakes. Now imagine what that would do to the water systems of Earth with an asteroid that was the size of Mount Everest going 20 times the speed of a rifle round. It was absolutely inconceivable amounts of tectonic tremors. What they did is they caused a bunch of earthquakes and these tsunamis, which went up through the inland sea, which ran from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. And it went all the way up to what is now North Dakota and caused these tsunamis, which then thrusted mud and caught up all these fish. And these fish and dinosaurs, there's actually dinosaur mummies preserved in this layer, at Tanis as well. All these things that lived at that time are all, trapped in this silty mudstone on top of this sand beach. And the sand beach itself has baby dinosaur footprints, has adult dinosaur footprints. It has insect burrows. It has mammal burrows. It has mammal bones, pterosaur nests. So there's a pterosaur egg that was intact, found at Tanis. So it really captures that whole day. What was going on that beach right before the impact and then the impact after. And so the fish in their gills, they have asteroid spherical ejecta, which are all the glass, falling from the sky, all the debris that's falling after the asteroid impact. And so the fish are choking on them. So we know if we do the calculations, that had to be in like 45 minutes after the asteroid hit. So if it hits in Mexico, all the ejecta is flying all over the planet, and it would have reached North Dakota about half hour, 45 minutes. And then the tsunamis come, tremors come.
A tsunami came from the Gulf of Mexico to North Dakota?
To describe it better, as opposed to like a tsunami coming all the way up, which was the first theory, but it wouldn't have made sense with the time frame. It would have taken too long for a tsunami to get up there and bury the fish while they were choking. It's actually impact tremors. So it's actually more so a wave of earthquakes that travels a lot faster, right, through the Earth's crust and reaches these rivers, these freshwater systems, just like a swimming pool in Southern California. They're affected by earthquakes, and then there's just these massive water disturbances. And so the water disturbances, or otherwise known as the freshwater tsunamis caused by the earthquakes, they are what caught up all these dinosaurs and fish and everything on this beach at the Tanis site. And just, all the silty mud at the bottom of the river, and washes all up on the sand beach next to it and pretty much preserves all these things, just like the pyroclastic flow of Pompeii preserving everybody who got caught.
So there's evidence within the fossilized fish based on what they consumed 45 minutes after impact, what they choked on. Is there evidence in some of these dinosaur fossils similar to that effect?
Yeah, there's a mummified thescelosaur leg. So thescelosaur was a small herbivorous dinosaur that walked on two legs, kind of similar to a pachycephalosaurus with a dome head, but it didn't have a dome head. And there's a mummy. I have examined it up close myself. It is a perfectly preserved dinosaur leg.
Wow.
Every minute scale, even, a bird foot had like the squishy, scaly toe pads of a bird.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the foot looks like. I mean, it looks like a leg of a dinosaur that died like a couple days ago.
Wow.
But it's all preserved, fossilized, mineralized replacement of the leg. There's a chunk of Triceratops flesh and skin, and even the keratinized little nodules that are on the skin. So this is all covered in the David Attenborough documentary, Dinosaur Apocalypse, The Final Day. The title might be along those lines, but if you look up Tanis site, David Attenborough, he did a documentary a couple of years on it. So it covers all these things. And even we know, the Tanis team and Robert De Palma were working on, they discovered, the impact happened at springtime. And we could see that through various isotopic analysis of the fish and how old they are. And the sturgeon are this big, then it had to have been spring, and, fossilized pollen and different stuff. And so, the team had made that discovery and a whole bunch of other discoveries too. Even some of the spherules are preserved in amber. This kind of gets to Jurassic Park territory, but glass turns to clay over millions of years. So all the spherules of the site are clay. They're clay nodules. But the ones that landed in amber are still glass, which is pretty amazing. Those nodules actually have pieces of the asteroid itself inside of them. My buddy Lauren Gurchi made that discovery when he was analyzing the spherical ejecta that had been caught up in amber. They actually found pieces of the asteroid, and they did isotopic analysis, and they match the Chicxulub impact crater isotope signature. That was like the smoking gun.
Wow. Yeah. Like bullet fragments.
Yeah. That's what, how David Attenborough puts it, that like they actually found like the bullet of the crime and the gun. Yeah. It's really like multiple lines of evidence, prove that it captures the first hour. There was a surge, and then the second, there's a second tsunami after that. So there's really like this double surge event that happens within a couple hour time frame. And it really is an amazing site, and that's in North Dakota in the Hell Creek Formation. So we not only generally knew that the dinosaurs ended at that time, but we actually had the Pompeii to go along with it.
Speaking of Pompeii, you mentioned earlier how you're able to understand the life history of the animal, injuries, illnesses, deformities. But where the residents of Pompeii died and who they died with gave us information about who they were. Beyond what we learn about the dinosaurs' physical condition, injuries, and illnesses, are we able to ever learn anything about how dinosaurs lived or what their relationships were based on where and how we find their fossilized remains?
Yes. For instance, one of the most famous cases to see how they lived, it was oviraptor. Oviraptor in the Latin means egg thief. So oviraptor was believed to have stolen eggs, but it was actually they were mothers that were on top of their nests as the sandstorm came in and buried them. We have an idea that because they are with nests means that they were nurturing parents. And there are other cases where we know that some sauropods buried their eggs in active volcanic areas where the soil was warm. They did that for hundreds of thousands of years because there's nest upon nest in the geologic record at a certain area in Asia. You know that they were nurturing parents just from how we find them, like how we find them near nests and how we find footprints near nests and then footprints themselves. We know that they were social animals, that they either were in packs and groups or the herbivores were in herds because we could see multiple footprints. We could see adult footprints with baby footprints and juvenile footprints. So, we can tell about their habits of living. There's, of course, plenty of unknowns. There's still debate on whether or not T-Rex lived in groups. We have other tyrannosaurids, and so cousins of T-Rex that we know lived in family groups where we have families buried together of different aged individuals. They're all together. So we know that they lived in family groups. We don't have that yet evidence confirmed with Tyrannosaurus Rex, although we do theorize that. Also just, generally herbivores living together, which you could kind of guess, right, from nature. Many herbivores pretty much live in groups. There's some exceptions, but they pretty much live in large herds. And so we kind of assume that, dinosaurs would probably be in a similar sense. So we can know about how they lived, and we could think of mating rituals. We could have theories of how they sounded. If they sounded certain ways, they were probably highly social, like birds today, the last living dinosaurs. So there's different clues like that that tell us, if they lived in groups or if there's evidence that they lived alone. So we can actually tell about the lifestyle of them in certain cases.
The Hell Creek Formation is also filled with what are called vertebrate microsites that catalog the many other animals that lived alongside dinosaurs in the late Cretaceous. What sort of animals were alive at that time in that place, and are any of their ancestors alive today?
Yes, so many of the smaller fauna are the ones who survived. Crocodilians, turtles, there's some lizards that would be the ancestors of Komodo dragons or monitor lizards. There's some sort of things that resemble Gila monsters. There's mammals, which, some of the mammals in the Hell Creek Formation could very well be our own ancestors. There were, mammals that were kind of possum-like or shrew-like. There were carnivorous mammals, too, that could probably get to the size of like a badger. There have been theorized to have eaten baby dinosaurs or fed on other things. So snakes, too, birds. There are a lot of small things that we would be generally familiar with. They wouldn't be too alien to us. The megafauna, the dinosaurs, would be very alien. But, the world of sturgeon, paddlefish, those are the ones that are preserved at Tanis. And we're familiar with sturgeon and paddlefish. So what lived in the creeks and stuff and the smaller fauna of the dinosaurs were some things that I think would be very similar to our world in many cases. And of course, the ancestors to lineages that are still around today.
Dinosaurs were a kind of reptile. Today, the largest land-based mammal, the elephant, is up to 6 times the weight of the largest land-based reptile, the saltwater crocodile. So what was it about that period in time when the dinosaurs existed that made it so reptiles could get so big while most mammals were smaller than rabbits?
Today, the reptiles that we have, the squamates, or, lizards, snakes, those things could only get to a certain size. Now, in the past, there were Titanoboa, which was like a giant 50-foot long snake. There was Megalania. It was a huge Komodo dragon species that lived in Australia during the Ice Age. Aboriginal people actually encountered this. Pretty terrifying thing to see, but
yeah, I was going to say that's
yeah. So, reptiles like that can get big, but the thing about the dinosaurs is that they were upright walking animals. So this kind of dives into the morphology of stuff where dinosaurs, had an upright walking posture like mammals. So they could forage from trees. They could hunt a lot more effectively, and they could be social.
Could I ask a clarifying question here?
Yes.
When you say upright walking, I'm assuming that doesn't strictly mean bipedal.
Right. It means that your hips are positioned in a way where your legs are directly pointed under you.
Mm.
So with a lizard, as you can see, it's sprawled.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And that has limitations. That conserves your energy in many ways, because when you're upright walking and running, you're using a lot of energy. So having a sprawled posture kind of conserves your energy. Typically, things that are walking upright or either bipedal or quadrupedal, but upright nonetheless, they are usually exhibiting more energy because they have really a better form of running around. They're actually better fit than animals that need to bask and who are cold blooded. So it's believed that dinosaurs, were either warm blooded or mesothermed, kind of a combination, cold blood and warm blooded. But, dinosaurs, I want to say to answer your question of how they compare to reptiles today and why they got so big. They are different from reptiles today in that, they had different thermal regulation. As I said, they were either warm-blooded or mesothermed. They have a different skeletal structure that allows them to run around places similar to a skeletal structure of mammals, at least in the sense of upright walk. And they are very different than mammals, of course, but they were able to grow big is because they had also really good circulation. That same system exists in the dinosaurs that are living today. So birds actually have different air sacs. They go throughout their bones and their bodies. They're able to store a lot of oxygen. With dinosaurs, we could see there's clues within the pneumatic bone of the animals that they had a similar system of being able to store and circulate more oxygen to these larger bodies. Similar system to birds today. One of the theories is that is what led to them being able to grow that large. And, mammals got big too. A lot of mammals got bigger than a lot of dinosaurs. The largest land-dwelling mammal does not compare to the largest land-dwelling dinosaur, but mammals could get pretty big too. But dinosaurs are just, to answer your question of why they were giant and today's reptiles aren't, they're just different. They're archosaurs. So they, had warm-bloodedness, they had better circulation, they had better airflow, transfer of oxygen throughout the body, and their skeletal structures were just different. They were able to be social, to be better hunters, to be herd-dwelling animals, to grow, to be able to forage different resources. All those factors combined are kind of what led to their evolution. As I call it, the nuclear evolutionary roided out arms race of nature was the dinosaurs.
When most people, at least people who are 30 and older, picture a dinosaur in their head, they think of what we saw in the Jurassic Park movies from the 1990s, distinctly reptilian in appearance. But now it seems like the prevailing view is that some dinosaurs had feathers. So how are we able to know one way or the other?
Some will never know because they just don't have any mummified remains or tissue that has been fossilized. So we'll never know, but we can have a good idea based off of the body size of which ones might have had feathers and which not. Maybe even also based on their taxonomy. So we could tell this family of dinosaurs, we have examples that we know for sure members of this family of dinosaurs were covered in feathers. So that means that other ones probably were too. I always kind of answer the feather question as like hair in mammals. You don't really think of elephants as hairy, but they still have hair. They still have hair along their back. So that was probably the case of T-Rex. It probably had some sort of proto-feather filament, kind of similar to an emu. It probably had as much of that as an African elephant or Asian elephant has hair. Probably very sparse, but T-Rex was very big and had to lose heat. So it probably wasn't covered in feathers. Then again, we have a 30-foot long cousin of T-Rex in China called Eutyrannus that we have specimens preserved in this kind of clay shale that preserve feathers very well. We could tell that Eutyrannus, this 30-foot long, more gracile tyrannosaurid, was covered in feathers. It was covered in a plumage. Smaller body size than T-Rex, and it was in a colder environment. And Anukosaurus, which was in Canada at the time of T-Rex, presumably it had feathers as well because it hunted in the Arctic. So you can make inferences that animals that were in colder environments probably had some sort of plumage and those that were in warmer environments didn't. Or ones that were a smaller body size, like theropods, typically had feathers. The herbivores aren't really theorized to have had feathers. It was just not an adaptation that the herbivorous dinosaurs, had. Some would have interesting quill-like things that protrude from their tails. That would be Psittacosaurus, also preserved in Asia, but not feather covering. Even the Thescelosaur from Tanis, the mummy, has no indication that that animal was covered in any sort of plumage. So the dinosaurs that do have feather coverage or plumage or protofeathers are typically the carnivorous theropods, and birds are related to those theropods. They're more closely related to those theropods than they are to other dinosaurs.
So it's largely context dependent.
Yes, on the weather, on the body size of the animal, like mammals today. A rhino doesn't have fur, a cat does. Pretty much every cat has fur, unless it's been some domesticated abomination. But it's generally like if you're going through the fossil record today, we found some cat or felid from like 30 million years ago. We could pretty much say it had fur. From all the cats we see today had fur. This felid definitely had fur. If we find a rhino-like thing that's 30 million years old, we could assume that maybe it probably didn't. Maybe it had some sort of fuzz, but it probably didn't have fur. Or if it was an Arctic-dwelling proboscidean, and those listening, proboscideans are any elephant-like creatures, so mammoths or elephants. If we find some proboscidean in a cold environment, then we could assume that it had fur. Or any mammal in a cold environment that isn't a marine mammal, it probably had fur. We can make those kind of distinctions. So when we find dinosaurs, it's all context dependent, body size, environment, etc.
In July of this year, a Stegosaurus skeleton nicknamed Apex became the most valuable fossil ever sold at auction at $44.6 million. Apex was originally discovered on private land in Moffat County, Colorado in 2022. Before this sale, the previous auction record was held by a Tyrannosaurus Rex named Stan, which sold for $31.8 million in 2020. Both auctions were won by private, anonymous buyers. Steve Brusotti, a paleontologist and evolutionary biologist out of the University of Edinburgh, said of the sale of Apex, quote, "It is a great shame when a fossil like this, which could educate and rouse the curiosity of so many people, just disappears into the mansion of an oligarch," end quote. What are your thoughts on the private sale of dinosaur fossils?
Okay, now I got to crack my knuckles. Are you ready for the seminar to start? This is like such a huge, diverse topic of so many different factors. And I have people who are either working for national parks, or I have private people that I talk to, and both have different views on it. My overarching analysis of the private public sphere fossil sales is that paleontology is, and always will be a symbiotic relationship between private and public entities. Fossils are sold, money is raised for excavations. Once something is discovered, it can't just be handed over for free. It has to be paid for. Even if it was a team from a museum or state university, there still needs to be funding for that. So there always has to be some sort of funds for the excavation or the preparation of the fossil. So the realistic reality is that there is a symbiosis between public and private entities. Getting to the sale of Apex specifically, when you have auctions, all the bidders are pre-approved. You can't just have like John Doe call in and buy something. All the people who are able to place a bid at Sotheby's have to be pre-approved. If not, then anybody could just call in and just BS a bid, and then it just wouldn't sell. And so when the promotional material for Apex, if some of the stuff that Sotheby's has posted on their social media and YouTube, they routinely harp that it was a scientifically significant specimen. They wouldn't be saying that if they didn't know for sure that it was going to a museum. So the guy who bought it, Ken Griffin, was the hedge fund guy, founder of Citadel Group. So he was one of the bidders, and I imagine that the museum in Abu Dhabi was also a bidder. And so Sotheby's knew that the top bidders were either going to donate it or buy it for their museum. A lot of the stuff, when we talk about, it's just going to go to Dr. Evil's man cave. That's not really the case now, because Stan went to the museum in Abu Dhabi. Big John the Triceratops went to a children's museum in Miami. Right? It was bought by a big tech mogul guy who donated it. The dueling dinosaurs, private sale to the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And then now Apex, which is bought by a billionaire with the purpose of donating it to the Field Museum. So a lot of the big money of these auctions and stuff in paleontology for scientifically significant and blockbuster dinosaurs, a lot of it is going to large institutions now. When we think of large wealth, we might think of greed, which is true. Of course, there's greed when there comes to large amounts of wealth. But other elements of wealth, too, are legacy, philanthropy, and tax write-offs. And so those elements are starting to show in the fossil market, is that the buyers wanted to go to a museum. The sellers even wanted to go to a museum, but just for the right price. And so buyers now are more so philanthropists, like the times of old. When paleontology first started, all the major institutions were started by private donors who paid for the expeditions in the 1870s and 1880s, to go find a lot of the first species of North American dinosaur. A lot of it was, big tech industrial moguls that funded the stuff. So the sale of Apex is really a great triumph. If it did go to somebody's man cave, yeah, it's terrible. But I think maybe Steve, I think he wrote that before the sale of the specimen. But evidently, it went to tech mogul Ken Griffin, who has publicly said that it's going to the Field Museum. A lot of big money is showing the philanthropic side of the fossil market.
You've said that there's a curse that comes with T-Rex fossils. Can you expand on that?
So the curse of the T-Rex is based on the fact that there's a lawsuit on essentially every single large T-Rex specimen. Sue, the T-Rex found in the Cheyenne River Reservation in 1993, discovered by the Black Hills Institute. That was a lawsuit between them, the landowner, Maurice Williams, the Cheyenne River Reservation, and then the federal government told the reservation, well, we gave that to you in the 1890s when, we killed everybody and forced you on that land. We still technically own it, so that's pretty messed up. But anyway, so there was a 4-way lawsuit with Sue. With Stan, there was a lawsuit between two brothers, Pete and Neil Larson of the Black Hills Institute. Neil wanted out of the Institute. I'm not speaking out of hand here. I believe this is kind of the very basic overview. I don't want to say anything that isn't, a misinterpretation, but Neil wanted out of the Black Hills Institute, and to settle his equity, they sold Stan, auctioned it. And Bloody Mary, one of the dueling dinosaur specimens, so it's a juvenile T-Rex or a Nanotyrannus, it's yet to be determined, that is kind of like dead next to a very well-preserved Triceratops specimen. That was a lawsuit between Clayton Phipps and mineral rights owners who thought that they owned the specimens because they own the mineral rights. The court determined the landowners owned fossils, so the dueling dinosaurs went to Clayton Phipps, and he did a direct sale with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And then Victoria was a lawsuit between two landowners who I had met at a restaurant, ironically, just like randomly in the Badlands at the town of Marmarth, North Dakota. I met the two landowners that were at that time currently in a lawsuit with Jared Hudson, a commercial paleontologist. And I don't know the exact outcome of that yet, or if it's still ongoing. But point is that there is a lawsuit with every major big T-Rex. There was also one with Tinker, which was a subadult, not quite a juvenile, but a subadult T-Rex, which is now owned by a museum in Europe. But when it was discovered in 2003, there was a lawsuit between Harding County and the excavators of that specimen. So from what I've laid out, there clearly is a curse and a track record, of T-Rex lawsuits. And it's the story of humans. Whenever there's some giant resource, we fight over it. It's no different from the hominids in 2001: A Space Odyssey fighting over the water hole. It's pretty much it's a more technical and existential, scientific and legal way, but it's kind of the same thing.
Back in 2023, I spoke with Ben Lamb and George Church, the co-founders of Colossal, which we mentioned earlier, a bioscience company aiming to bring back long extinct animals, including the woolly mammoth. You're on Colossal's youth advisory board. So how did you and Colossal first connect, and what does their project mean to you?
I first connected with Colossal when I saw that they had hired a former executive who worked for Legendary Pictures. And so I kind of thought that they were going to be doing a lot of content. And so I had DM'd them, said, hey, I would be happy to do any narration or editing or, various stuff. So then that's when we got connected. And I followed them, and then they followed me back on Instagram. And then so I DM'd them and inquiring about that. And that's what led to the Youth Advisory Board, and also my continuing and forthcoming work with making content collaborations with them. And the mission of Colossal means a lot to me because, I always had a background, at least a slight background in biotechnology. And I kind of had a above average understanding of biotech and genetics and paleogenetics. And I always knew that if we actually did like a Manhattan Project and applied the tools of this, that a lot of different things would be possible for not only de-extinction, but reestablishing the lost grasslands and environments that we used to have at not too recently ago. We say, 14,000 years ago, Ice Age, that's a long time, but
it's a blip.
It's a blip. It's a total blip. Like when we see bison and moose and brown bears, It's beautiful. I fall in love with, North America, my home, and especially the West, living out in the Dakotas. And, when you think about it, it's a minute remnant of what was recently here. Like we look at the Serengeti, and that's like only having antelope and a jaguar. Like that's what North America is. It's missing its proboscideans, it's missing its ground sloths, it's missing, other different things. So I always thought that, de-extinction was possible if we actually applied the right staff and funding towards it. And not only that, but it's not just about having prehistoric extinct species and resurrecting that. It's about resurrecting things that we wiped out recently. And not only that, the even broader mission, which is really, I think, the biggest thing, is we get caught up in at least the press and the public psyche gets, focuses on the de-extinction part. But if we're able to bring back species, that means that anything alive today can absolutely be proliferated and saved and conserved. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if we're able to bring back an extinct species, gone are the days of trying to get some things in captivity to breed. And, oh, they're not breeding, and there's 5 left. Oh, no, that's it. Can't do anything. Those days are over. So this technology is so important for biodiversity. Like, it's cool for the de-extinction, but the type of things that we'll be able to do, and it transfers into the biomedical field too, because any of the tools, techniques that we could do with de-extinction, I mean, imagine what that could do for illnesses and then more broadly for our environment.
If there was an animal that went extinct recently enough that we had the material to bring it back, is there an animal on your wish list that you would love to see Colossal one day bring back with its technology?
I would love to see the 10-foot-tall carnivorous kangaroo, which is actually an abomination from hell, if you think about it.
Hasn't Australia been through enough?
Right, yeah. But seeing all the Australian megafauna would be pretty insane, but I would I would love to see a ground sloth.
Oh, those big old ones, right? The ones that are much bigger than what we have, yeah.
Yes, like seeing a huge ground sloth would be, an incredible thing, because the American lion, the saber-tooth mammoths, we still have big cats and proboscideans today. I mean, don't get me wrong, seeing all those are amazing. I guess my point with the ground sloth is it's like a totally lost lineage. There's nothing like it alive today. Sure, there are sloths, but there's really no land-dwelling animal that is like a ground sloth that we could experience today. So having that totally lost family of animals, would be a really cool thing for Colossal to bring back. But I'll have to say that I am excited about the prospects of Colossal Biosciences, and I would predict, so I'm not disclosing anything that I haven't, that I can't say. I would predict that there is a lot more to come with regards to de-extincting lost species.
Just after I spoke with Ben Lamb and George Church, I spoke with Forrest Galante, who is a wildlife conservationist and who also hosts shows on the Discovery Channel. And his work is focused a lot around finding animals that we thought were extinct or are very near extinction. Talking with you and hearing your passion about an adjacent topic, I would love to see the two of you collab one day. That's my wish list.
Absolutely. No, I would love to have them out to the sites, or to, maybe Colossal could send us in to get some ground sloth DNA from a cave in South America or something.
That would be cool. That would be so cool.
Yeah, I would love to really collaborate with other people, because I know I could see that Forrest is obviously, much bigger. He's done shows and everything. He's done a lot of impactful rediscovery of once thought to be extinct species. But we're sort of in the similar sphere in that, we do our own citizen science. We're not an institution. And we have a content creation side to try to inspire the public, which is important to not do like a copy of Steve Irwin. He was the original guy, right? He was the original enthusiastic wildlife TV personality. Of course, he had David Attenborough, as the narrator and filmmaker, but, Steve was the guy who was hands-on. So it's cool to find, you have Forrest and, you have me and I, we find our own way, right? We find our own passion and our own voice and our own style of how we present things. And I'd like to think that, Forrest and I are kind of in a similar way, slightly different fields of biology, but kind of the similar presence, trying to have that exciting enthusiasm and, hands-on, like actual discovery, actually doing work, right? That's kind of a big thing of our brands, is to be hands-on doing the actual science. And to be able to bring that to the public, is a very important thing. So I would love to collaborate with him at some point. If he hears this, and I need to shoot a DM. I haven't shot a DM yet, but I think I should.
You should. Yeah, I'm in full support. At the start of our conversation, we talked about the distance between the curious public and the field of paleontology. One thing that I was surprised to learn as I was prepping for this conversation was that you need an advanced degree, like a master's, to practice paleontology. So my question is for you, Harrison, is that what your advocacy is trying to combat? Is it an effort to close that distance between people who are curious about what you do, but might not have the money or access to achieve it?
It absolutely is, because as popular of a science as paleontology is, it's relatively inaccessible. To go on digs, you have to first off be in the right region, and then you have to either have funding for it or to be part of a university group, or at least to hope that a university lets you in for an internship or something. And so it's a relatively inaccessible science in many different ways. There is a lot of fossil hunting that you could do locally in different areas, but, to find, the big dinosaurs or big mammals or, large animals, the high impact stuff, it's a relatively inaccessible science. So what I want to do is to try to connect people to that. I want to try to show that you can have your own operation. You can go on private land or county land with the proper permits, and you can do things that were otherwise seen as big institutional activities. In California, it was relatively inaccessible to do paleontology. The only paleontology is Sharktooth Hill in Bakersfield, which is just like a place with a lot of shark teeth, or the La Brea Tar Pits, which is some massive institution which you cannot get into. I got rejected from La Brea actually a week before I went to go find Alice. So that was kind of a moment for me to show that, you don't need the institutions to be able to do the science. You can do it yourself or in collaboration with other entities, and you don't need to be a part of an institution. And that is a theme that I do want to show people, or at least I want to have resonate with people while they're having a more personalized connection to my content and my work.
If we had had this conversation 2 weeks ago, I think I would probably end this a little bit differently. But last week, I got something back in the mail. I don't know if you're familiar with this company. It's called Parting Stone. And what they do is they take the cremated remains of an animal or a human, and they turn them into these polished stones that you can hold in your hand. And my wife had this dog named Darcy for almost 16 years. I had the privilege of knowing him for 16 months, and he made just the biggest impact on my life and, of course, on hers. We sent his remains to Parting Stone and received them back. We received the stones back at the end of last week. And as you've been talking, I've been looking at one of the stones on my desk, and I'm holding it in my hand right now. And the reason I bring this up is because there is a great symbolism, a real tangible power of holding something that's gone in your hands. And so I have such a great appreciation for what you do, Harrison, both in preserving our distant past, but also making people more excited about the future of paleontology. So thank you for your work. And today, thank you so much for your time.
Michael, thank you. I really had a blast answering all your questions. Great questions. And I hope to talk to you in the future, because there's definitely so much more to cover, whether it's future excavations, future discoveries, or just things generally in the field of paleontology.
I will definitely take you up on that.
Great.